Have you ever wondered what your neighbors are really like behind closed doors? We live so close to them, separated by thin walls or small fences. But how much do we really know? What if the person next door was hiding something horrifying? This is the story of my neighbor, the man who lived just a few steps away, and the dark secrets buried beneath his smile. At first, I thought I was imagining things. The faint sound of dragging, like something heavy being pulled across the floor. It always happened at odd hours between 2 and 3 a.m. I tried to convince myself it was nothing. Maybe furniture being rearranged or an old house settling. But then, there was the smell. A sour metallic scent would seep through the walls. Faint at first, but stronger every night. It clung to the air, making it hard to breathe. I asked the landlord if anyone had complained. He just shrugged, saying the guy next door kept to himself. Quiet type, but pays his rent on time, he said. I should have let it go, but the smell never went away. I started paying attention to my neighbor. His name was Mr. Carson, mid-40s. Always dressed in the same faded jacket. His hair was thinning, and he wore glasses thick enough to distort his eyes. He barely spoke to anyone, just a nod in the hallway, a polite smile. But something about that smile always felt wrong, like he was forcing it. Every night, he'd leave his apartment around midnight, carrying a large black duffel bag. He always walked to the woods behind our building. He'd be gone for an hour, sometimes longer. When he came back, the bag looked lighter. I followed him once. He walked into the woods, following the same narrow path. I stayed far behind, hiding in the shadows. He stopped at a clearing, set the bag down, and began digging. I didn't stay long enough to see what he buried. Curiosity got the better of me. One night I pressed my ear to the wall. I could hear him talking, whispering to someone, but there was no one else in that apartment. The words were too muffled to make out, but I swear I heard my name. I saw him leave around midnight like always, and I noticed he'd left his window slightly open. I don't know what possessed me, but I climbed out onto the fire escape and peeked inside. There was a room he'd always kept locked. The walls were covered in plastic sheets. There were knives lined up on a table, polished, organized by size, and in the middle of the room, a mannequin, human-sized, with long black hair. Its face was painted to look like someone I knew. It looked like me. There were photos pinned to the walls, photos of me, taken without my knowledge. Walking to work, sitting at the cafe down the street, looking out my own window. He'd been watching me for months. The police didn't believe me when I called the first time. They came, knocked on his door, and left after a few minutes. Said he was a harmless loner. But 2 nights later, my upstairs neighbor went missing. Her name was Clara. I'd seen her talking to Mr. Carson once or twice. She had always complained about the smell too. Always heard the dragging sounds. The landlord said she'd probably just moved out without notice, but she left her cat behind. Her light stayed on for days. I knew she was still in that building, somewhere. I called the police again. They didn't believe me at first, said I was imagining things, but the smell was undeniable. When they finally searched his apartment, they found something far worse than I ever could have imagined. Under the floorboard notes wrapped in plastic were pieces of bodies. He'd been living there for years, hiding in plain sight. They never found out how many victims there were. They only found pieces. In his freezer, they found Clara. After Mr. Carson was arrested, they let me back into the building to collect my things. On my doorstep, there was a package, wrapped in brown paper. No return address. Inside was a mannequin, with his face painted to look exactly like mine. And beneath it was a note. "I'll be back." I moved away the next day, but some nights, I still hear those dragging sounds. I wonder if he's out there, watching, waiting, because some neighbors never really leave.